Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dalaran, and in today's video we'll be going over an Outlaw Rogue PvE guide for the patch 9.1. This guide is going to cover quite a lot about getting your Outlaw Rogue up and running, whether you're a brand new player, first time trying out Outlaw Rogues, or a veteran player looking at maybe checking out Outlaw Rogue for raiding or Mythic Pluses. This guide is going to cover, as I just said, raiding for single target output, as well as the Mythic Plus viability of the spec, talk about the talents, rotation, everything you need to know to get your character up and running. This is my all-time favorite spec in the game. I play it constantly and I've been enjoying it a ton when it comes to patch 9.1, and I feel like it's just such a good playstyle right now, where it is in Shadowlands, which with quite a lot of viability with different legendaries that you can run. Anyway, let's just dive into my favorite spec in the game, the Outlaw Rogue for patch 9.1. So the way I'm going to organize this guide is going to be in different sections, but first let's go over how good is Outlaw Rogue going into this tier, the season 2 for Mythic Pluses, the new raid Sanctum of Domination. I would say Outlaw Rogue is decent when it comes to raiding. It is the spec that I've been playing for raids up until I can get my Sylvanas daggers, which is where I want to check out some of the assassination rogues and subtlety rogues as well. But Outlaw Rogue is a fantastic spec with some of the cleave fights inside of that raid. You also can play for a very decent single target build, and I mean decent, like this is actually like a viable playstyle. If you're trying to etch out the best numbers with the best in slot gear, you might find that with some of the other specs in the game, but Outlaw can definitely hold its own. It's a great spec for AoE output, and of course the dungeon utility the old rogues bring. I mean, that's not really an Outlaw Rogue specific thing, but rogues are just fantastic. Outlaw still maintains quite a lead when it comes to AoE damage when it comes to Mythic Pluses as of currently. First, let's talk about the covenants of your Outlaw Rogue. Before we tell you the best and the most popular covenants, let me just be honest. All of the covenants are valid and beautiful when it comes to playing Outlaw. Any covenant you want to play, it really doesn't matter too much. The difference in terms of the sims for covenants, at least for Outlaw, is very small, and it looks like it's not really going to grow that much further as we get more renown points. For Outlaw Rogues, it's really close. They are very, very similar to one another, so if you decide to play a covenant because you like the aesthetic or you simply like the ability, it's perfectly valid to play the covenant you enjoy. There's a good chance that if you play the covenant and the class combo that you like the most, you'll probably have the fastest time improving because you're having more fun, rather than if you played the covenant you disliked but you played it because it is just deemed to be the most popular. But if you really absolutely want to play something that's popular right now, or something that's looking like it's going to be really good down the line, the Necrolords and Kyrians look slightly ahead in Mythic Pluses, particularly the Kyrian with the new legendary that they have. And Ventior looks slightly ahead when it comes to pure single target situations, but honestly you cannot make a wrong choice when it comes to your covenant as an Outlaw Rogue. Next, let's talk about the talents. The talents that you want to run for your Outlaw Rogue, we'll talk about which ones are the best in the rows and where they might be good in. In the first row, you have two options between Quick Draw as well as Ghost Strike. Ghost Strike is kind of the go-to for pure single target situations, and this is what allows Outlaw Rogues to do quite a decent amount of single target boss damage. Ghost Strike is a 35-second CD ability with 30 energy, so it's not super expensive, but the cooldown is going to be much shorter because of the cooldown reduction inherently applied to Outlaw Rogue. We'll talk about that mechanic in a little. But Ghost Strike is a very decent option for pure single target raiding. Quick Draw is also pretty strong. It's just generally the better choice. It feels better to play with and functions really well when it comes to AoE cleave, but also in single target. That's generally my go-to choice. Level 25, most rogues go Acrobatic Strikes, have an extra yard on your abilities, allows you to kind of be a little further from the boss or have that extra reach while avoiding mechanics. And also it gives you extra length when it comes to cleaving enemies in AoE. In the level 30, Deeper Stratagem is basically the option you're going to go for, especially for raiding. It's a very decent choice, but if you don't like the way Deeper Stratagem feels, you can totally play Mark for Death. Mark for Death is a little bit better when it comes to Mythic Pluses and AoE cleave situations, but it also can work pretty well in single target. Like together with Ghost Strike, it can actually work out quite okay. I personally prefer Deeper Strat, especially with Quick Draw, but if you like Mark for Death, then maybe you'll like pairing Ghost Strike with that together on pure single target fights. Level 35, Cheat Death is generally our go-to. There are some mechanics where sometimes you can use Elusiveness for very specific mechanics, but in most cases you're just going to take Cheat Death as a safety net in case you misstep a mechanic inside of a raid and just get one shot, and instead of getting completely knocked out you can kind of keep fighting, or you can sometimes cheat death certain mechanics in order to cheese some of the fights. Level 40, I generally just take Dirty Tricks. It doesn't really matter which you take in this row. This is a utilitarian row, but for Mythic Pluses, I like having the no energy cost on my Gouge, since we no longer constantly stun enemies with Between the Eyes like we used to back in BFA. Level 45 is kind of boring. Alacrity is the best choice. I would love to make Dreadblades work someday, and maybe I will. Maybe Loaded Dice at some point will become really good, but the early sim suggests that Alacrity will be the better choice. At level 50, it's a choice between Blade Rush and Killing Spree. Both of them are pretty good. Blade Rush is generally better at pure single target, and if you ever need AoE where you're uncapped in AoE, Blade Rush actually will hit every target around you. There's no caps on this ability whatsoever. Killing Spree is a little bit better for burst AoE situations, and is looking really strong in Mythic Pluses, especially when pairing with certain Legendaries. It really comes down to you which one you want to run. I suggest trying Killing Spree in Mythic Pluses together, Blade Flirting enemies down, and using Blade Rush maybe for raiding. Next, let's talk about the Legendaries. Since we have only a certain amount of Soul Cinders and Soul Ash, you don't want to just make a Legendary and just have to recraft it all over again. So let's find out which are the best, the safest, and the most optimal Legendaries for Outlaw Rogue. Celerities continues to be the most optimal legendary for the spec. Adrenaline Rush increases the damage you do by 8%, and your Slice and Dice has a chance to proc Adrenaline Rush. This one is really strong in single target and AoE. This one is the most recommended right now for most Outlaw Rogues to craft. If you are going to be checking out Outlaw casually or maybe even competitively, crafting as high rank as you can of Celerity, even like let's say right now rank 5 if you want to, that's probably the best choice to get started as a rogue. But it looks like with this patch we will have some other options in terms of which legendaries we want to run. Obedience is another legendary that's actually going to be really good if you're a Vent tier. This one is simming really highly on pure single target fights. I cannot wait to try Obedience because that seems to be also a really strong legendary for the other rogue specs, but for Outlaw Rogue that seems to be fantastic. It provides haste, but also with this legendary versatility, which is your best stat as Outlaw Rogue, and the short cooldown on this ability I think plays into the cooldown reduction aspect of Outlaw Rogue itself. Outside of that, we have also Green Skin's legendary. This one is simming really well for Mythic Pluses in AoE situations, Dungeon Slice on raid bots. Green Skin is another one that should be mentioned. It is simming really well in Dungeon Slice. Doesn't always mean that that translates into effective gameplay in dungeons, but this one is one of the better ones for the dungeon sim experience. So we will see how well this legendary pans out. It is one I actually enjoy playing with. It really mimics the Battle for Azeroth pistol shot playstyle of Deadshot. It is not popular, but we'll see if patch 9.1 is going to make it so. Other legendaries which have been good before and I think are going to continue being good is Deathly Shadows. This one was very popular in the last season, especially as a Necrolord rogue, and I feel like while this one doesn't have the highest sims, it has the most flexibility. This one can work well in pure single target situations. This one can work really well in AoE situations. As a Necro rogue, you have even more aspects of cooldown reduction since you generate a lot more common points in AoE, so getting constant vanishes is extra valuable there. Master Assassin is another one that's really strong, especially when you pair it together with Killing Spree inside of Mythic Pluses, and you really should try it if you crafted this legendary on your rogue. This one is actually looking really good as well, and right now it's having some really good early success. As for which one of these is going to be the best Mythic Plus legendary down the line, I think we're just going to have to wait. There's definitely a lot of potential with Master Assassin. That one was played last season. Deathly Shadows already proven that it's really strong. Green Skin now has a lot of the sims behind it, so we'll see which one of those options is going to be good. But this just shows you that Outlaw Rogue has a lot of options in terms of which legendaries you run. They offer different builds and slightly different playstyle, and I think a lot of you guys will have quite a bit of fun playing Outlaw Rogue because of this variety. Next, let's talk about gearing for your Outlaw Rogue. The best way to gear your character is to find out, well, what's the best items in your bags, and that is honestly to just do sims through raid bots. Learning how to do sims with raid bots, learning how to use their add-on, and trying to maximize the value of the items in your bags is going to be worth it if you're thinking of playing your rogue more than casually. If you're really trying to etch out those big numbers in your rogue and you're really just trying to dive into more in-depth side of things. But if you're someone who's a new player, or just starting out, or just want like a cheat sheet for what is the best gear that you can get on your rogue, your stats are going to be as follows. Agility is your best stat. Definitely your primary stat is the strongest stat you can get in the game. Versatility, second best. Afterwards, it's haste equal to crit. Crit is a little bit better in Mythic Pluses and AoE situations, while haste is slightly ahead when it comes to pure single target situations. But keeping about an even amount of those is generally advised. Mastery is the worst stat. You want to try to avoid as much mastery as you can, since it's not a stat that synergizes well into the playstyle of an Outlaw Rogue. For your weapons, I get this question constantly. You can have a heavy weapon in your main hand. That means it can be an axe, fist, sword, or a mace. Your offhand, however, has an extra option of a dagger. So what you should do with your character is when you gear, your main hand should have the highest item level one-hander. That is, again, a sword, a fist, a mace, or an axe. All those count as a one-handers. And your offhand can have either your second highest one-hander or the highest item level dagger in your offhand attack. Daggers are really good because they synergize really well with the poisons that we got this expansion. Instant poison is back, and those dagger strikes get you slightly more poison hits on the enemy. When it comes to rotation for your Outlaw Rogue, this is how the priority should be as follows. Ambush whenever you can. That will generate you a lot of common points and do quite a bit of damage. From there on, you want to build your common points with Sinister Strikes and Pistol Shot procs. Just make sure you don't overcap on any common points. This is the most important thing. So if you're sitting, let's say, at 4 common points and you have a Pistol Shot proc that's going to give you 2 common points because of your talent setup, then you'll want to just use Finisher, then use the Pistol Shot proc afterwards. Do not overdraw on common points if you can. Now, when it comes to spending your common points, there you got a couple different finishers to maintain. Roll the Bones, while not a spender, you'll want to maintain at all times. Always have some sort of a buff available for your rogue as much as you can. Then Slice and Dice. Immediately invest your full set of common points into Slice and Dice and make sure Slice and Dice never falls off. Afterwards, if you don't need to refresh Slice and Dice, you should invest your common points into Between the Eyes. In a Mythic Plus scenario, you should do Between the Eyes on the target with the highest amount of health and then focus them as best you can. Between the Eyes is a valuable buff that's going to give you extra crit value on your abilities. Afterwards, if you have 5 common points or 4 and you have Slice and Dice rolling, Between the Eyes applied on the enemy, you can hit Dispatch as a basic filler and then continue with the rotation from there. The AoE rotation for Outlaw Rogue does not really change much at all. You press Blade Flurry and you continue on with your rotation as it was for single target. And that's it, because Blade Flurry would just simply cleave all your abilities onto nearby enemies. Except try to use Blade Rush as well as Killing Spree inside of your Blade Flurry window, because all those abilities will have extra power to them while used inside of your Blade Flurry. So generally, gameplay for Outlaw Rogue is going to be to build common points and spend them. When you do that, you have a passive that lets you reduce the cooldown of majority of your abilities. That means you can get your Adrenaline Rush back quicker as your main offensive cooldown. That means you can get Between the Eyes back up quicker and Roll the Bones so you can roll those buffs more often. That means you can get your Grapple Hook for mobility, Vanish for resets, and much more. Unlike some of the other specs in the game who like to hold their cooldowns for maximum value, Outlaw Rogue doesn't really play into that. For the most part, you will almost never go wrong by just pressing your stuff on CD. The faster you get on cooldown, the faster you're going to get it back because of the cooldown reduction mechanic. Roll the Bones is something we should talk about really quickly. If you're a brand new player just trying out Outlaw Rogue, I think the best advice for you is just to maintain a buff of Roll the Bones. Don't worry too much about it being a specific buff. If you're a new player to the game, just maintaining some kind of buff from Roll the Bones is going to be the most important thing you can do. If you are more an experienced player that understands kind of the inner workings of your Outlaw Rogue, some of the buffs you should aim for would be True Bearing as well as Broadside. Those are your best buffs that you should try to maintain as much as possible, or try to not re-roll out of them too early. Now for some conduits. When you got your rogue set up, you chose your covenant, you chose your talents, time for some of the best conduits for your character. Count the Odds is your best in slot conduit. It is an Outlaw Rogue specific conduit where your ambushes as well as your dispatches have a chance, the better the conduit, the higher the chance, to get you a Roll the Bones buff you do not already have. Having more buffs as Outlaw Rogue means more damage. So this conduit ends up being the best for all situations, single target as well as AoE. Next, every one of the covenants has a decent conduit. None of them are really best in slot, but they're all pretty good. Like, some of them are a little bit better in AoE, some a little bit better in single target. So depending on how you sim your character, some will be a little bit better in specific situations, but generally they're pretty good no matter what you do in the game. Sleight of Hand is also kind of okay. It just increases your chance for your Roll the Bones to roll more than one buff slightly, but it's RNG as well, so it ends up being kind of just okay. Triple Threat is also okay. The proc chance for it is kind of low, the damage that it does is kind of low, but you do Sinister Strike often throughout a dungeon run or a raid, so it is going to net you a little bit of damage and a little bit of value. If you're not sure which conduit you want to run for your character, it's also a best idea to sim it with raid bots to find out the best soul bind setup, as well as the best conduits for your character. But as we said before, all the covenants for Outlaw Rogues are valid and beautiful, so honestly you can't really make too wrong of a choice no matter which one you end up running. Anyway, thank you guys so much for checking out this video. This will be my updated Outlaw Rogue guide for patch 9.1 PvE for the expansion of Shadowlands. I do hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and as always, I'll see all of you guys in another one.